Welcome back to more mother-in-law stories where users share their crazy experiences with their own mother-in-laws, and we might even feel a little bit better about our own mother-in-law. If you are new to my channel, please don't forget to subscribe to join our awesome community, and without any further ado, let's dive right into the stories. And the first one is titled, Mother-in-law gets shut down in court, judge threatens her with contempt if she says one more thing. I have posted another story relating to my ex-mother-in-law not caring about my daughter's health. This story happened several years after the first one. There's a bit of backstory to set the stage. When I married my ex, she had 2 sons from her first marriage. We then added 2 girls to the family. My stepsons were 3-year-old and 18 months when I joined the household, and their father was nearly an absentee parent. Father died shortly after this story began. I had taken a job with my state's largest newspaper as the distribution manager. I was in charge of hiring and training newspaper carriers, and I delivered the bundles of newspapers to them before 5 AM every day. By the way guys, shout out to the people who deliver newspapers because it is definitely a difficult job. Anyway, when I was the same age my stepsons were, 11 to 12-ish, I had also worked as a paperboy for the same newspaper. I had several routes I needed to find carriers for. 2 of those routes were in my neighborhood. To give my boys some spending money of their own, I gave each boy one of those routes. They were small routes within 2 or 3 blocks of our house. Mother-in-law did not like it, called it child abuse. Never mind that I had done the same job when I was their age. That is how I was able to save enough money that at 16 I bought my first car. She even called CPS, Child Protection Services. At that time it was just a caseworker at the local social services office. They officially investigated the first time she called, no abuse or neglect found. The second time the caseworker called me directly. In the late 1980s there was only 2 caseworkers and it was a small town. They knew who I was. The complaint was nearly identical to the first one, so the only thing they wanted to know if anything had changed, but no case. By then I really wanted to cut mother-in-law completely out of my children's lives, but I was, and still am, a firm believer in my kids having reasonable access to their extended families. Keyword is reasonable. All 4 children visited grandma when their schedules allowed it. However, when mother-in-law was alone with the boys, she slowly convinced them that by me making them work, I was abusing them. Since CPS and the police would not listen to her anymore, she got my boys to try and quit. This part I didn't know until much later, 20+ years. As the carrier manager, that was not a career goal for me, and after a series of dead-end jobs for me, my little family was low income. My boys liked being able to buy things that I normally could not afford, so they didn't want to just quit. Very early on in the marriage, mother-in-law convinced the boys to start calling me daddy, but by this time she was going the opposite direction. Important note here, the boy's biological father died and his 2 sons from his first marriage, my boys, his son from his second marriage and his son from his current marriage, were all minors. The 4 boys each received an equal share of Social Security survivor benefits until they turned 18. I don't remember how much it was, but it was substantial to a low-income family. Mother-in-law was determined to keep me from using that money for our family, but she had no control over it. And then, within a few days of each other, each boy did something on their paper routes that got them in trouble. One boy stole a checkbook from an unlocked car and managed to write checks to himself. Some customers on his route only wanted to pay the carrier personally by check, and he had a joint savings account with his mother at the same bank the checks were from. So it wasn't unusual for him to come in by himself to cash checks written to him. He got caught because he tried cashing too many checks in a short period of time. The other boy was getting bored and did not like getting up at 6 AM every day to go walk a few blocks. So as he passed through an apartment building on his route, he decided to mix different colored paint that was stored on shelves in the laundry room using a clothes washer. Since they were brothers and were both accused of some serious charges, the court combined the cases. Each boy admitted their crimes, the only difference the court made was in the punishment phase. The older boy got sent to a foster family that had experience with young offenders. The younger boy, the court wasn't as willing to take him away from the family, so mother-in-law said she would take him. I tried to object but was told that since I had never been made their legal guardian and since mom had no objection, I could not do anything. Since mother-in-law had used that to her benefit, the next part of the punishment phase backfired on her. Their mother had no income and had 2 younger children at home. My income would not be used to pay restitution mother-in-law had wanted me to pay. The judge agreed to grant my wife and I a court-appointed attorney to advise us. I didn't know it yet, but that attorney was also representing my father while my parents were getting divorced, and he had billed my father for work his office never did. He then decided to quit representing my father and me after my father brought the bill up to the State Bar Association. He did not file a formal notice or even tell us, he just did not show up in court. Before we got married, my ex-wife had been charged and convicted of child neglect. I knew of it, but I was not part of it. The state's attorney just reopened the same file. He was blind and his files were all color-coded, so his secretary literally reopened the original file folder but did not add on the correct color. The judge relied on the state's attorney to provide the paperwork and knew about the color codes. Mother-in-law tried to bring up the issue of child abuse, and even though the judge ruled it was not relevant to this case, by the time we had a couple of hearings regarding the status of the punishment, the judge had forgotten the details. Small county, he was the only circuit court judge assigned to that county, so the blame goes to the state's attorney's office. Jump ahead 3 years, my appointed attorney had not shown up for several hearings, so the judge appointed a different attorney. During this time I finally landed a job with career potential and moved our family closer to my work. At the next status hearing, my new attorney asked a simple question, as he said, "To refresh everyone's memory, would the state's attorney please read the charges again?" Even though he was blind, he had a summary of the case in Braille in his copy of the file, plus he had an excellent memory, so the judge allowed it. My older son had completed his restitution and had been placed back in my home, but mother-in-law kept arguing that the younger boy needed to stay with her. The judge, going by the color-coded file, reluctantly agreed to leave things as they were. Less than 15 minutes after that hearing started and after the judge was reminded it was a criminal case and not an abuse issue, he stopped the hearing. After looking at the file closer, he then admitted that if I wanted to, I had legitimate grounds to file a complaint with the State Bar Association. He did not say this, but I had legitimate grounds to sue the state and mother-in-law. Why? The state law on juvenile criminal cases only allowed an 18-month period from first hearing to final adjudication. On non-felony cases, we were double that already. He then ordered that the case was now closed and that both boys are returned to the full custody of their mother and me. Mother-in-law tried to object. Judge shut her down with, "Case closed. Ruling is final and it is to be done immediately, unless mother-in-law wanted to spend the night in jail while the sheriff went to her house to collect my son's personal property." She then added that she had already paid for my son to start driver's education the next week, but she relented. I will never say mother-in-law is dumb, but she is used to getting her way. Until I came along. The last thing she said to the judge made me stop her in the hallway in the courthouse. I belong to a group that stresses that everyone should take driver's education and motorcycle safety courses, even non-riders, to make them more aware of motorcycles. Where my wife and I lived at the time, those classes were not available. Since mother-in-law had already paid with son's social security money and I didn't want my wife to drive 200 miles every day for a week, I was an over-the-road trucker and I was due back to work, so I wasn't going to be able to assist. I graciously agreed to let my son stay with mother-in-law until his classes were done. But if he quit or if she blocked my wife from picking him up, I would inform the judge of her non-compliance. Update: court-appointed attorneys are not free in this state. The county places a lien on any real estate the requester, me, owns or will own within that county. I have not lived in that county since the beginning of that case, but it was my hometown and most of my extended family still lives there. When my father died a few years ago, I, along with my siblings, inherited his house. A couple of years ago we sold that house at market value to my niece. Almost 30 years later I was reminded of that little lien before the sale could be completed. I had to agree to pay off that lien and then I would get what is left over of my share. If I had known back then I could have sued both my ex and her mother for those fees. Mother-in-law had made it clear I was not my boy's father and that I was not, according to the court, legally responsible for debts incurred on their behalf. We are not talking about big money, about $1,500 out of a little over $20,000, but it is the principle. Besides, mother-in-law is living off her own social security benefits and ex is still low income. Turned out that our family was low income because of her choices, so chances are very slim that I would ever see that money. I don't see or talk to either of them, and until very recently none of my children had talked to them also. Ex-wife is still ex-mom, but ex-mother-in-law had a recent health scare, so my children went to see her. And wow guys, I gotta say that was definitely a ride, and I'm kind of surprised that this story was posted on r/entitled parents, because usually they don't really have those interesting serious stories. And by the way guys, if you are one of those people that watches me daily but has not subscribed to me yet, I would just like to say it would be amazing if you could subscribe to my channel so we would reach 29,000 subscribers this month. This would then also mean that we are closer to 30,000, which is one of my big goals on YouTube. Thank you very much for your support, and now let's move on to the next story. And the next one is titled, Am I the jerk for telling my wife her parents are not allowed to ever watch our son again? My wife and I have a 2-year-old son and have been married for 4 years. Our anniversary was a month ago and we found a nice secluded cabin on Airbnb and rented it out for a long weekend getaway. My wife asked her parents if they would be willing to watch our son and they agreed as long as we dropped him off at their house. That worked for us since it was on our way anyway. I was raised Lutheran and my wife was raised Catholic, but neither of us currently go to church and have not had our son baptized. My mother-in-law knows this and hates it. She thinks our son needs to be baptized or he will burn in hell. She is that kind of Catholic. So we go on our trip, and when we pick up our son and ask how the weekend went, mother-in-law says everything went fine and that she has saved my son's soul from the devil. I ask her what she meant and she says she had our son baptized that morning at her church. I tried my best to keep my cool, so I didn't scream at mother-in-law in front of my son, but I pretty much grabbed my son and left. On the car ride home, I was fuming and told my wife as calmly as I could that this would be the last time her parents have our son unsupervised. She tried to downplay what her mom had done, but I told her we need to wait until we get home to talk about it because I'm not fighting in front of my kid. When we got home and had a chance to talk about it, things got heated. I told my wife I no longer trust her parents with our son and that if they did something like this behind our backs, I cannot trust them to respect our wishes as parents in the future. I said this was a huge breach of trust and will forever look at her mom differently. She continued to try to defend her mom, saying that she was only doing what she thought was best for her grandson. She even downplayed it by saying that it is just a little water and a few words and we don't go to church anyway, so what does it matter? I told her that under no circumstances will I allow her parents to watch our son by themselves again. I said that we can still let them see their grandson, but only if we are present. I also said that if she doesn't see what the big deal is with this situation, that maybe we are not on the same page as parents and maybe we need to see a counselor. She started crying and said that this is not the kind of decision I get to make on my own and I am an a-hole for trying to tell her what kind of relationship her parents can have with our son. I told her that I no longer have any trust or respect for her parents and that I don't know if there's anything they can do to repair that. I told her I don't care if that makes me an a-hole, but what her parents did was unforgivable in my eyes and they put themselves in this position to lose privileges with our son. She's been trying to convince me to change my mind for the last month, but I'm not budging. To me, this is a hill I am willing to die on." And a user in the comments said, "Not the a-hole, these types of baptisms violate church law, and if it actually was done by their priest, you should contact the bishop and file a complaint." And guys, I'm wondering, what is your opinion about all of this? Do you think OP is overreacting, or if he is the a-hole? Personally, I would say he is definitely not the a-hole, because in my opinion, if that happened to my own kid and my in-laws would have done that, I would definitely be against it as well, especially if they did not talk about it with me before. Let us know about your thoughts in the comments. Update to the "Am I the a-hole for telling my wife her parents are not allowed to watch our son ever again?" story. Turns out some of you were right. My wife was in on it. I confronted her a couple days after I posted and directly asked her if she knew that her parents planned this. She broke down and confessed everything to me. Mother-in-law had been pestering her about baptizing our son non-stop, and my wife finally caved. My wife has been working from home during the virus while my job requires me to go into office. My wife and mother-in-law started doing Zoom meetings with mother-in-law's priest to start the baptism process. They lied to the priest and told him that I was okay with baptizing our son, but did not want to be involved. The priest allowed it and they started doing online baptism classes while I was at work. My wife admitted that she planned it around our anniversary getaway and that mother-in-law had somehow convinced the priest that her and father-in-law would be the only ones in attendance. My wife told me that I wasn't supposed to find out, but mother-in-law could not keep her mouth shut for even one day about it. Their intention was to keep this from me permanently. I did contact the church to let them know the truth. I talked with the priest and he was surprisingly helpful. He said he would take the proper steps to make sure mother-in-law is no longer welcome in their church and to reach out to the local parish to see what further steps need to be taken. I have yet to hear back from them on that. My wife and mother-in-law are mad that I got her kicked out of her church, but I don't care what they think or feel anymore. These people who I love and trust had betrayed me, and I felt a range of emotions I did not know existed. My wife begged for forgiveness, but the fact that she didn't come clean on her own makes me feel she would have kept this from me unless I confronted her. She's willing to do therapy, counseling, whatever it takes. I don't know if I want to put in that work. I feel like there's no coming back from this. I contacted a divorce lawyer and started discussing what a divorce would look like and if there's any way I can add provisions to a divorce agreement that would keep my in-laws from seeing my son unsupervised. He's been very helpful, but I have not given him the go-ahead to actually file for divorce yet. I feel I am still too angry about the entire thing to think rationally and want to give myself time to fully grasp what a divorce will mean for me and my family. My wife and I are not talking much. I pretty much go to work, come home to play with my son, go to bed and repeat. I don't know what the future is going to bring, but I do know that without the support and help from people here, I don't think I would have the clarity I do now. And guys, I'm wondering if your significant others did this to you, or well, did this to your kid, would you also break up with that person, or in this case, divorce that person, or do you think that is taking it too far? I gotta say, I'm not exactly sure what I would have done in that situation, but it is definitely a breach of trust if you ask me. Either way, thank you so much for watching the video until here. This means you are an absolutely fantastic ripe star and I really appreciate your support. Thank you so much. However, I would like to ask you for one thing. I noticed that a lot of my subscribers have not clicked on the bell button, and recently YouTube is kind of difficult once again, aka that they don't recommend my new videos to older subscribers. So to make sure that you really get each and every single one of my videos in your sub box, I would suggest that you click on the bell button to make sure that you don't miss any of my videos. Thank you so much in advance. I hope you have a fantastic day and I see you again tomorrow.